The crimson sunrise painted the Nebraska sky as Lorelai Keller pressed her knife against the old oak tree, her fingers trembling slightly as she carved the first letter of her name into the weathered bark. It was 1878, and Galesburg was barely a town worth marking on any respectable map, but it was her home at least for now. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze, knife halfway through carving the elegant curve of an L. She didn't turn around, hoping whoever it was would simply pass by and leave her to her solitude. But the rhythmic thudding slowed, then stopped altogether, followed by the soft creak of leather as someone dismounted. "That's my tree, miss." The voice was deep and smooth like honey over gravel. Lorelai's hand stilled, but she didn't turn around. "I don't see your name on it." A low chuckle rumbled behind her. "That's because I don't need to mark what's mine for everyone to see. I know it, and that's enough." Curiosity finally got the better of her, and Lorelai turned, coming face to face with the most striking man she'd ever seen. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-kissed skin and eyes the color of a stormy sky. His dark blonde hair fell in waves to his collar, and a hint of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dusty riding pants, and boots that had clearly traveled many miles. "Lucas Daniels," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "This is my land you're standing on." Lorelai lifted her chin defiantly. "The last I checked, Mr. Daniels, this particular spot belonged to no one but the wild itself." "Is that so?" His lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And who might you be, carving your mark on my favorite tree, Lorelai Keller?" She straightened her spine, determined not to be intimidated. "I'm staying with my aunt in town while I figure some things out." His eyes flickered to the half-carved L on the trunk. "You've got a strange way of figuring things out, Miss Keller." "I've always believed in leaving my mark on the world," she replied, gesturing to the knife still in her hand. "Even if it's just on one tree in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska." Lucas stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "Carve it on my heart instead." The words hung between them, unexpected and charged with something Lorelai couldn't quite name. For a moment, neither spoke, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves above them and the distant call of a meadowlark. "That's quite forward of you, Mr. Daniels," she finally managed, her voice steadier than she felt. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his face and made her heart skip a beat. "I'm a forward kind of man, Miss Keller. Out here, you learn quickly that life's too short for anything else." Lorelai knew she should leave, should walk away from this stranger with his intense eyes and unexpected words. But something held her in place, something more powerful than propriety or common sense. "I should get back," she said at last, though she made no move to go. "Will you come back?" Lucas asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that surprised her. Lorelai hesitated, then nodded once. "Perhaps. Tomorrow, same time." He sounded hopeful, almost boyish in his eagerness. Despite herself, Lorelai smiled. "I'll think about it." "I'll be here," Lucas said simply, as if it were a promise he had no intention of breaking. As Lorelai walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back, watching her until she disappeared over the hill. Her fingers tightened around the knife in her hand, and she wondered what it would be like to carve her name somewhere more permanent than bark. She hadn't come to Galesburg looking for anything or anyone like Lucas Daniels. After the devastation of the past year, love was the furthest thing from her mind. Yet as she made her way back to town, she found herself already planning to return to that oak tree tomorrow, drawn by a force she couldn't explain and wasn't sure she wanted to resist. The next morning, Lorelai rose before dawn, her mind already filled with thoughts of Lucas Daniels. She dressed carefully in her best everyday dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes and pinned her chestnut hair in a loose bun at the nape of her neck. "You're up early," observed her Aunt Martha, eyeing her suspiciously over her coffee cup. "And looking mighty pretty for a Tuesday morning." Lorelai busied herself with buttering a piece of toast. "I thought I'd go for a walk. The mornings are so beautiful here." "Hum," Martha murmured, clearly unconvinced. "Wouldn't have anything to do with that Daniels boy, would it?" "Saw you talking to him yesterday when you were supposed to be picking wildflowers for the table." Heat flooded Lorelai's cheeks. "We just happened to cross paths, that's all." "He's a good man," Martha said carefully. "Not like most. Lost his pa and brother in the war when he was just a boy. Built that ranch of his from nothing but determination and grit." Lorelai tried to appear disinterested, but her curiosity got the better of her. "He lives alone, has for years, keeps to himself mostly." Martha set down her cup. "Your uncle did some business with him once or twice. Said he was fair and honest, which is high praise coming from Harold." Lorelai nodded, absorbing this information and filing it away. "I should go before it gets too warm." Martha stood and began clearing the breakfast dishes. "Just be careful, child. Your heart's still healing, and men like Lucas Daniels have a way of complicating things." "It's just a walk, Aunt Martha," Lorelai insisted, but they both knew it was more than that. The morning air was crisp as Lorelai made her way to the oak tree, her heart beating a little faster with each step. Part of her hoped Lucas wouldn't be there, it would be easier, safer. But a larger part, a part she was only beginning to acknowledge, desperately wanted to see him again. As she crested the hill, her breath caught in her throat. There he was, leaning against the tree, his horse grazing peacefully nearby. He straightened when he saw her, and even from a distance she could see his smile. "You came," he said simply when she reached him. "I said I would think about it," she replied, trying to sound casual. "And I did." Lucas gestured to a blanket spread beneath the tree, a small basket sitting on one corner. "I brought breakfast. Nothing fancy, just some biscuits and honey and coffee." Lorelai's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You were confident I'd show up." "Not confident, hopeful." There was that smile again, the one that made her stomach flutter. "Will you join me?" She hesitated only briefly before sitting down, arranging her skirts modestly around her. Lucas poured her coffee from a tin pot, the rich aroma filling the air between them. "Tell me about yourself, Lorelai Keller," he said, handing her the cup. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" She wrapped her fingers around the warm metal, grateful for something to hold on to. "I needed a fresh start. My parents died last year, influenza, and afterward, there didn't seem to be much reason to stay in Chicago." "I'm sorry," Lucas said quietly, and she could tell he meant it. "Losing family leaves a hole nothing else can fill. You sound like you speak from experience." He nodded, pouring his own coffee. "My pa and brother died at Gettysburg. Ma couldn't bear it. She passed 6 months later. Doctors called it pneumonia, but I always thought it was a broken heart." "How old were you?" Lorelai asked softly. 15. Too young to enlist, old enough to run a farm." His voice was matter of fact, without self-pity. "When the war ended, I sold everything and came west. Wanted to build something that was mine, something no war could take away." Lorelai studied him, seeing past the rugged exterior to the boy who had lost everything and refused to be defeated by it. "And did you build something that was yours?" His eyes met hers. "I'm still working on it." They talked as the sun rose higher in the sky, sharing pieces of themselves between sips of coffee and bites of honey-drenched biscuits. Lorelai told him about growing up in Chicago, about her father's bookshop where she'd spent countless hours reading everything she could get her hands on. Lucas spoke of his ranch, the small herd of cattle he was slowly building, and his dreams of someday having land that stretched as far as the eye could see. "What about your dream?" he asked, lying back on the blanket and looking up at the canopy of leaves. "What does Lorelai Keller want from life?" She considered the question, realizing it had been a long time since anyone had asked her that or since she'd asked herself. "I used to want adventure," she said finally, "to see the world beyond Chicago, to experience everything life has to offer. And now," Lorelai sighed, "now I just want peace, a place to belong." She glanced at him, then quickly away. "What about you? Is there a Mrs. Daniels in your future plans?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. "I always figured I'd marry someday. Find a woman strong enough for this life, gentle enough to make it worth living." His voice dropped lower. "But the right woman hasn't come along, at least not until recently." Their eyes met, and Lorelai felt heat rise to her cheeks. She stood abruptly, needing to put some distance between them before she did something foolish, like believe his words meant something they couldn't possibly mean. "Not yet. I should head back," she said, brushing crumbs from her dress. "Aunt Martha will wonder where I've gone." Lucas rose in one fluid motion. "Can I see you again?" "I don't think that's wise," she replied, even as her heart argued otherwise. "Since when is wisdom a requirement for happiness?" He stepped closer, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "Meet me here tomorrow, or at the creek a quarter-mile east. It's even prettier there." Lorelai knew she should refuse, should maintain the distance that propriety and self-preservation demanded. But looking up into those stormy eyes, she found herself nodding. "The creek. At noon." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I'll be counting the hours, Lorelai Keller." As she walked back to town, Lorelai told herself this was just friendship, just two lonely souls finding comfort in conversation. But deep down, she knew better. There was something happening between them, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Lorelai's thoughts kept returning to Lucas, to his smile, his stories, the way he looked at her as if he could see straight through to her soul. It had been just one day, 2 brief meetings, yet she felt as if she'd known him all her life. "Be careful," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "Remember what happened before." But even as she cautioned herself, she knew tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The days turned into weeks, and meeting Lucas became the center of Lorelai's world. They explored the countryside together, on foot at first, then on horseback after Lucas brought a gentle mare for her to ride. He taught her to fish in the creek, laughing when she squealed at having to bait her own hook, then cheering wildly when she caught a small trout on her 3rd cast. "You're a natural," he declared, watching as she carefully returned the fish to the water. "Couldn't bear to eat him," she explained, wiping her hands on her riding skirt. "He fought too hard for his freedom." Lucas's expression softened. "You've got a good heart, Lorelai Keller." "Don't sound so surprised," she teased, but his compliment warmed her more than she cared to admit. As July gave way to August, they fell into a comfortable routine. 3 or 4 times a week, they would meet at their oak tree or by the creek, sometimes bringing food to share, other times simply walking and talking until the sun began to sink toward the horizon. Lucas told her about his ranch, about the new calf born just days ago, about his plans for expansion once he saved enough money. Lorelai shared stories of her childhood, of the books she loved, of her brief and disastrous engagement the previous year to a man who had proven to be nothing like he seemed. "He was charming," she explained one afternoon as they sat with their feet in the creek. "Everyone loved Charles. My parents thought he hung the moon." "But not you?" Lucas asked, watching her face carefully. Lorelai shrugged. "I thought I did. He said all the right things, bought all the right gifts." It wasn't until after the engagement that I began to see the real Charles controlling, jealous, quick to anger. Lucas's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," she answered quickly. "But there are other ways to hurt someone." She trailed her fingers through the cool water. "When my parents died, he expected me to lean on him completely, to do whatever he said without question. When I didn't, when I dared to have opinions of my own about the funeral arrangements, about what to do with the bookshop, he showed his true colors." "What happened?" "I broke off the engagement. He didn't take it well, threatened to ruin my reputation, said no one else would ever want me." Lorelai laughed without humor. Perhaps he was right. In one swift movement, Lucas took her hand, his larger one engulfing hers. He was wrong about everything. Lorelai's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes, at the warmth of his skin against hers. They had been careful until now, maintaining a respectable distance despite the growing attraction between them. This first deliberate touch felt momentous, like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "Lucas," she whispered, not pulling away but not quite returning the pressure of his fingers. "I know what you're thinking," he said quietly. "That it's too soon, that you barely know me, that men can't be trusted." He squeezed her hand gently. "And maybe you're right, but I'm not Charles. I don't want to control you or change you. I just want to be with you exactly as you are." Tears pricked at Lorelai's eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of me," she shook her head. "Of this. Of feeling something I'm not ready to feel." Lucas brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was so tender it made her heart ache. "Then we'll take it slow as you need." True to his word, Lucas never pushed. Their meetings continued, but now there were casual touches, his hand at the small of her back as he helped her over a fallen log, her fingers brushing his as they reached for the same apple from the basket. Each touch was brief, innocent, yet charged with an electricity that neither could deny. Meanwhile, life in Galesburg continued around them. Lorelai helped her aunt in the small general store she ran with Uncle Harold, learning the business while contributing what she could to the household. She made a few friends among the townspeople: Sarah, the young schoolteacher; Thomas, the blacksmith's son who clearly harbored a crush on her despite Lucas's increasingly frequent appearances in town; and Mrs. Peterson, the elderly widow who taught Lorelai to make preserves from the wild berries they gathered together. Lucas, too, began to emerge from his self-imposed isolation. He started joining Lorelai and her aunt and uncle for Sunday dinner after church, impressing Uncle Harold with his knowledge of cattle and charming Aunt Martha with his unfailing politeness. He even volunteered to help when the town organized a barn raising for the new settlers who'd arrived from Pennsylvania. It was at this barn raising in early September that everything changed. The day was sweltering, the kind of late summer heat that seemed to suck the moisture from the very air. Men worked stripped to their shirt sleeves, sweat darkening the fabric as they hoisted beams and hammered nails. Women bustled about preparing food, setting up long tables in the shade of nearby trees. Lorelai moved among them, helping where she could, but her eyes kept straying to Lucas. He worked alongside the other men, his movements sure and efficient, muscles flexing as he lifted and carried. Several times, she caught him looking back at her, a slow smile spreading across his face when their eyes met. "That boy is sweet on you," Sarah commented, catching one such exchange as they laid out pies on the dessert table. Lorelai flushed. "We're friends." "Friends don't look at each other the way he looks at you," Sarah replied with a knowing grin. "Or the way you look at him, for that matter." Before Lorelai could formulate a response, a commotion broke out near the half-built barn. She turned just in time to see one of the support beams giving way, men shouting warnings as they scrambled to safety. Lucas was moving too, but in the wrong direction toward the danger instead of away from it. Time seemed to slow as Lorelai watched him push young Billy Peterson out of harm's way, just as the beam came crashing down. There was a terrible moment of confusion, of dust and debris and shouting, and then she was running, her heart in her throat. "Lucas," she screamed, pushing through the crowd that had already gathered. "Let me through, please." He was on the ground, half buried under the massive beam, eyes closed and face ashen. Several men were already working to lift the wood off him, straining against its weight. "On three," Mr. Peterson shouted. "1, 2, 3. With a collective grunt of effort, they managed to raise the beam enough for Uncle Harold and Thomas to pull Lucas free. He remained motionless, a gash on his forehead bleeding freely, his right leg bent at an unnatural angle. Lorelai fell to her knees beside him, heedless of the dirt soiling her dress. "Lucas," she whispered, touching his face with trembling fingers. "Can you hear me?" For one horrible moment he didn't respond. Then his eyelids fluttered and he groaned, his eyes focusing slowly on her face. "Lorelai," he murmured, voice thick with pain. "Are you hurt?" A hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat. "Am I hurt? Lucas Daniels, you nearly got yourself killed." He tried to smile, wincing as the movement pulled at his cut. "Worth it if you're going to fuss over me like this, Doctor." Peterson, who had been examining Lucas's leg, spoke up. "Broken, as I suspected, but a clean break. You're lucky, young man. A few inches to the left and that beam would have crushed your chest." Lorelai blanched at the thought, and Lucas reached for her hand, squeezing it weakly. "Don't look like that," he said softly. "I'm fine, or I will be." "We need to get him to my office," Dr. Peterson continued. "I'll need to set that leg properly." Several men fashioned a makeshift stretcher, carefully lifting Lucas onto it. As they prepared to carry him away, he held tight to Lorelai's hand. "Stay with me," he asked, vulnerability plain in his eyes. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In that moment, seeing him injured and in pain, Lorelai finally admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Lucas Daniels. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Lucas was taken to Dr. Peterson's office, where Lorelai held his hand while the doctor set his broken leg, her heart breaking at each muffled sound of pain he couldn't quite suppress. Afterward, the decision was made to move him to Aunt Martha and Uncle Harold's house temporarily, as his own ranch was too far out of town for proper medical attention. "Just until you can manage on your own," Aunt Martha insisted when Lucas tried to protest. "Harold and Thomas will ride out to your place tomorrow to check on your animals and bring back whatever you need." So Lucas was installed in the small guest room downstairs, his legs splinted and bandaged, his forehead cleaned and stitched. By the time he was settled, night had fallen, and the exhaustion of the day caught up with Lorelai in a rush. "You should rest," she told Lucas, standing at his bedside. "Dr. Peterson left laudanum if the pain gets too bad." "Stay a little longer?" he asked, patting the edge of the bed beside him. "Just until I fall asleep." She hesitated, glancing toward the door. Aunt Martha had gone up to bed, and Uncle Harold was in his study. It wasn't proper, being alone with him like this. But then again, nothing about their relationship had followed the usual rules of propriety. Lorelai sat carefully on the edge of the bed, taking his hand in hers. "You scared me today," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I scared myself," he replied with a wry smile. "But I couldn't let that beam hit Billy. He's just a kid." "I know." "It was brave and foolish and exactly what I would expect from you." She traced the lines of his palm with her fingertip. "But please don't make a habit of heroics. My heart can't take it." Lucas reached up with his free hand, cupping her cheek. "I'll try to be more careful with your heart from now on." The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the immediate conversation. Lorelai leaned into his touch, allowing herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings for this man who had, in just a few short weeks, become the most important person in her world. "Lucas," she began, not sure what she wanted to say but needing to say something. "SHH," he murmured, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. "We have time, all the time in the world, but they didn't." That became painfully clear 3 days later when a telegram arrived for Lorelai. She was sitting with Lucas on the back porch, reading to him from one of her favorite books, when Uncle Harold brought it to her with a grave expression. "It's from Chicago," he said, handing her the folded paper. Lorelai opened it with a sense of foreboding, her eyes scanning the brief message. The blood drained from her face. "What is it?" Lucas asked, immediately alert to her distress. "Charles," she whispered. "He's coming to Galesburg, says he wants to make amends and start fresh." She looked up at Lucas, panic rising in her throat. "He'll be here in 2 days." Lucas's expression hardened. "You don't have to see him." "I don't want to," she agreed. "But you don't know Charles. He won't take no for an answer." "He'll have to," Lucas said firmly, "because I won't let him anywhere near you if you don't want to see him." Lorelai appreciated his protectiveness, but the reality of their situation suddenly hit her with full force. Lucas was confined to the house with a broken leg. He couldn't protect her from Charles, couldn't even stand without assistance. And Charles was charming and persuasive, and had a way of twisting situations to his advantage. For the first time since arriving in Galesburg, Lorelai felt truly afraid. Charles Wyndham arrived on the afternoon train 2 days later, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that marked him immediately as an outsider in the small prairie town. Lorelai watched from the window of the general store as he descended onto the platform, surveying his surroundings with barely concealed disdain. She had hoped foolishly, perhaps, that he would ask around town, giving her time to prepare. Instead, he headed directly for Aunt Martha's store as if he knew exactly where to find her. Lorelai barely had time to compose herself before the bell above the door jingled, and there he was. "Lorelai," he said, removing his hat. "You look well. Country life agrees with you." She straightened her spine, grateful that the solid counter separated them. "What are you doing here, Charles? Is that any way to greet an old friend?" He smiled, that charming smile that had once made her heart flutter but now only filled her with dread. "I've come to bring you home, of course." "This is my home now," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "There's nothing for me in Chicago." Charles stepped closer to the counter, lowering his voice. "Don't be ridiculous, Lorelai. You don't belong here among these rustics. Your place is in society at my side as my wife. I broke our engagement, Charles. I made my feelings quite clear." "You were grieving," he dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. "Not thinking clearly. I've been patient, given you time, but enough is enough. Pack your things. We're leaving on tomorrow's train." Lorelai felt a flare of anger cut through her fear. "I'm not going anywhere with you. Our engagement is over. It's been over for nearly a year." Charles's smile hardened at the edges. "I've already spoken to your aunt. She agrees that Chicago is where you belong." "That's not true," Aunt Martha said sharply, emerging from the back room. "I said no such thing, Mr. Wyndham, and I'll thank you not to put words in my mouth." Charles's face flushed with anger, but he quickly composed himself. "Mrs. Keller, surely you can see that Lorelai's talents are wasted in a place like this. In Chicago, she could have everything: social standing, culture, a beautiful home." "Seems to me," Aunt Martha replied coolly, "that my niece has already found what she's looking for right here in Galesburg." Charles's eyes narrowed as he looked between the two women. "Is that so? And what, pray tell, has she found in this God-forsaken backwater that she couldn't have in Chicago? Me. All three turned to see Lucas standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on a crutch, his face pale with the effort it had taken to walk the short distance from the house to the store. "Lucas," Lorelai hurried from behind the counter, going to his side. "You shouldn't be up." "Couldn't let you face him alone," Lucas murmured, his eyes never leaving Charles's face. Charles looked Lucas up and down, taking in the splinted leg, the rough clothes, the sun-weathered skin. "And who might you be?" "Lucas Daniels." He shifted slightly, putting his arm around Lorelai's shoulders as much for support as to make a point. "The man who loves her." Charles's laugh was cold. "Love? What would a cowboy know about love? What can you offer her besides hard work and isolation? Does she know what life would be like as a rancher's wife? The endless drudgery, the loneliness, the constant struggle just to survive." "She knows exactly who I am," Lucas replied evenly. "I've never pretended to be anything else." Charles turned to Lorelai, his expression softening in a calculated way she recognized all too well. "Lorelai, be reasonable. This infatuation, this rebellion, it's understandable after everything you've been through. But it's not real. Come back to Chicago with me. I promise things will be different this time." Lorelai looked from Charles to Lucas, seeing them side by side for the first time. One polished and urbane, offering a life of luxury and social standing, the other rugged and straightforward, offering nothing but himself and whatever future they could build together. There was no contest. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Charles," she said firmly. "I found something real here, something honest and true. And yes, life on a ranch will be hard work, but it will be my choice, my life, lived on my terms." Charles's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Lorelai, a terrible mistake." "The only mistake I made was not seeing you for what you really are sooner," she replied, her voice steady. "Please leave, Charles. There's nothing for you here." For a moment, she thought he might argue further, might make a scene, but Charles had always cared too much about appearances for that. Instead, he jammed his hat back on his head and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "When you come to your senses, and you will, don't expect me to be waiting." His eyes flicked contemptuously to Lucas. "Enjoy playing cowgirl while it lasts." The door slammed behind him, leaving a ringing silence in the store. Lorelai let out a shaky breath, turning to Lucas, whose face had grown even paler. "You need to sit down before you fall down," she said, guiding him to a chair behind the counter. "Worth it," he grunted as he sank into the seat. "To see the look on his face when you told him off." Aunt Martha bustled about, bringing Lucas a glass of water and fussing over him until he assured her he was fine, just tired. Then she discreetly retreated to the storeroom, leaving the two of them alone. "Did you mean it?" Lucas asked quietly once they were alone. "About the ranch, about it being your choice." Lorelai knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "Every word. I want a life with you, Lucas. Whatever that life looks like. It won't be easy," he warned. Charles wasn't entirely wrong about that. "There will be hard work, long days, tough seasons." "I know," she smiled up at him. "I'm stronger than I look." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his eyes serious. "Lorelai Keller, I have loved you since the moment I found you carving your name on my tree. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life with you, a family, a legacy." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Lorelai's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She reached up, pulling his face down to hers for a kiss that tasted of salt and sweetness and promise. "Is that a yes?" he murmured against her lips. "Yes," she whispered back. 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in Galesburg's small church. with Aunt Martha weeping openly and Uncle Harold standing proud as he gave Lorelai away. Lucas, still on crutches but improving daily, had never looked more handsome in his new suit, his eyes never leaving Lorelai's face as they spoke their vows before God and the entire town. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the town hall, with food and music and dancing, though Lucas could only manage a single slow dance. Lorelai held close in his arms as they swayed carefully to avoid putting weight on his injured leg. "Mrs. Daniels," he murmured in her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" "The nicest," she agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Though I'm not sure the name matters as much as the man it belongs to." Lucas's arms tightened around her. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy, Lorelai. That's a promise." "You already make me happy," she told him, lifting her face for his kiss. "Everything else is just a bonus." Later that night, after Uncle Harold drove them out to the ranch in his wagon, Lucas insisted on carrying Lorelai over the threshold of their home, broken leg and all. "You'll hurt yourself," she protested as he set the crutches aside and gathered her in his arms. "Worth it," he replied, a phrase that was becoming something of a motto between them. "I intend to do this properly." And he did, managing the 3 steps up to the porch and through the door before setting her gently on her feet in the main room of the small but solidly built house. A fire had been lit in the hearth, Thomas's doing, most likely, and someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Daniels," Lucas said softly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Home," Lorelai repeated, looking around at the simple furnishings, the well-swept floors, the curtains Aunt Martha had helped her sew the week before. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. "I like the sound of that." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, skin against skin and breath mingling, Lorelai knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Charles had offered her a gilded cage. Lucas had offered her freedom, the freedom to be herself, to love and be loved without conditions or expectations. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "How lucky I am," she replied honestly. "How different my life would be if I hadn't come to Galesburg, if I hadn't decided to carve my name on your tree that day." Lucas smiled, pulling her closer. "I think we would have found each other somehow, somewhere. Some things are just meant to be." As she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, Lorelai thought he might be right. Some things were indeed meant to be, and this love between them, was definitely one of them. The years that followed were everything Lucas had promised: hard work and joy, struggles and triumphs, moments of breathtaking beauty alongside days of backbreaking labor. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts, Lucas's practical knowledge complemented perfectly by Lorelai's meticulous record-keeping and natural business sense. By their first anniversary, Lucas's herd had doubled in size, and they were able to hire 2 young brothers from town to help with the increasingly demanding workload. By their second, they had added a bedroom to the house, in anticipation of the baby Lorelai was carrying. Lily Martha Daniels was born on a crisp autumn morning in 1880, her lusty cries filling the ranch house as Lucas paced nervously in the front room while Aunt Martha and the midwife tended to Lorelai. When finally allowed in to see his wife and daughter, Lucas wept unashamedly, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that seemed suddenly too large and clumsy for such a precious task. "She's perfect," he whispered, staring in wonder at the tuft of dark hair and tiny rosebud mouth. "Just like her mother." Lorelai, exhausted but radiant, reached for his hand. "She has your eyes, I think, and definitely your stubborn chin." Life settled into a new rhythm with Lily's arrival nights interrupted by hungry cries, days punctuated by moments of pure joy as they watched their daughter grow and thrive. Lucas proved to be as natural a father as he was a rancher, often carrying Lily with him as he went about his chores, telling her stories about the cattle and horses, singing off key lullabies that never failed to make Lorelai smile. When Lily was 2, Lorelai surprised Lucas with a special gift on his birthday, a small wooden plaque she had commissioned from Thomas, who had developed quite a talent for woodworking. Burned into the polished surface were their names Lucas, Lorelai, and Lily, surrounded by an intricately carved oak tree. "To hang by our door," she explained as he ran his fingers over the smooth wood, "so everyone who visits knows who we are." "It's beautiful," Lucas said, pulling her close for a kiss. "But you know, I never did need to see your name carved on anything to know you belong with me." Lorelai laughed, remembering their first meeting. "And yet it all started with me carving my name on your tree." "Best vandalism that ever happened on my property," Lucas agreed with a grin, hanging the plaque beside their front door with meticulous care. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James Harold Daniels, who entered the world with the same determination that characterized his father. James was a sturdy boy with a serious expression, and a gentle way with animals that endeared him to Lucas from the start. "He'll be running this place before he's 10, Lucas predicted proudly as they watched 4-year-old James solemnly helping to feed the chickens, his little face scrunched in concentration. "With Lily as his business manager, no doubt," Lorelai added, laughing as their daughter, now 6 and fiercely independent, corrected her little brother's technique with all the authority she could muster. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding year by year until the Daniels name became synonymous with quality cattle throughout Nebraska and beyond. Lucas and Lorelai worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, building something that surpassed even Lucas's most ambitious dreams. There were hard times too, of course. The winter of 1885 was particularly brutal, with blizzards that lasted for days and temperatures that dropped so low even the hardiest animals struggled to survive. They lost nearly a third of the herd despite their best efforts, and for a time, it seemed as though all their hard work might be for nothing. But they persevered, drawing strength from each other and from the community that had become their extended family. Uncle Harold and Aunt Martha, though slowing down with age, still drove out to the ranch regularly, bringing supplies and news from town. Thomas, now married to Sarah, the schoolteacher, helped Lucas rebuild fences and barns damaged by the fierce winter storms. Even Mrs. Peterson, well into her 80s by then, sent jars of her famous preserves to brighten their table during the darkest days. By spring, the worst was behind them, and with it came an unexpected opportunity, a chance to buy the neighboring property when old Mr. Simmons decided to move east to live with his daughter. The land would nearly double the size of their ranch, but the asking price was steep, requiring everything they had managed to save over the years. "It's a risk," Lucas acknowledged as they discussed it late into the night after the children were asleep. "But think of what we could do with that additional grazing land." Lorelai studied the crude map he had drawn, showing how the 2 properties would fit together. "It would secure Lily and James's future," she said thoughtfully. "Give them something solid to inherit one day. So we do it?" Lucas asked, his eyes alight with excitement and just a hint of apprehension. "Stake everything on this expansion." Lorelai thought of how far they had come since that day by the oak tree, of all they had built together through hard work and determination. "We do it," she agreed, sealing the decision with a kiss. "Together, like everything else." The Simmons property became theirs just before Lily's 8th birthday, marking the beginning of a new chapter for the Daniels Ranch. With the additional land came additional responsibilities, and soon Lucas and Lorelai found themselves hiring more help, building new structures, and expanding their operations in ways they had only dreamed of before. Through it all, they remained true to the values that had guided them from the start: honesty, hard work, and an unwavering commitment to each other and their children. The simple ranch house grew along with their prosperity, adding rooms and comforts while still maintaining the warmth and character that made it home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Lorelai by taking her back to where it all began: the old oak tree that had witnessed their first meeting. The tree had grown taller and broader over the years, its branches reaching toward the sky with the same determination that had carried them through a decade of marriage. "Remember this?" Lucas asked, running his fingers over the faded L Lorelai had started to carve that day so long ago. "How could I forget?" she replied, leaning against him as they both gazed at the ancient trunk. "I was so annoyed when you interrupted me." Lucas laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Liar, you were intrigued from the start." "Perhaps a little," she conceded with a smile. "Though I never imagined where that intrigue would lead." "No regrets?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in the question despite all the years and all the evidence to the contrary. Lorelai turned to face him, taking in the familiar features that had only grown more dear with time: the laugh lines around his eyes, the streaks of silver beginning to appear at his temples, the strong jaw that their son had inherited. "Not a single one," she assured him. "Every moment with you has been a gift, Lucas Daniels, even the hard ones." From his pocket, Lucas pulled out a small pocket knife, opening it with a practiced flick of his wrist. "I thought we might finish what you started," he said, offering her the knife. "Properly this time." With a smile, Lorelai took the knife and carefully, deliberately carved her initial into the bark, deeper and more permanent than her first attempt had been. When she finished, she handed the knife back to Lucas, who added his own L beside hers. "There," he said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Now it's official. I think 10 years of marriage, 2 children, and one of the finest ranches in the county already made it pretty official," Lorelai teased, but she understood the sentiment behind the gesture. Some symbols mattered, even if only to the two people who recognized their significance. Lucas pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the passion of their youth and all the depth of a love that had only grown richer with time. "I meant what I said that day," he murmured against her mouth, "about carving your name on my heart." "I know," she whispered back, "and I carved yours on mine the moment you said it." As they walked hand in hand back toward the ranch house where their children waited, Lorelai reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a chance meeting beneath an oak tree to a life built on love and shared dreams, every step had led them exactly where they were meant to be. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful silence, Lorelai and Lucas sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt against the cool evening air. The vastness of their ranch spread out before them, moonlight silvering the grass and catching on the windows of barns and outbuildings that represented years of labor and love. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gone back to Chicago with Charles?" Lucas asked, his voice thoughtful rather than concerned. Lorelai considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not because I wish I had, but because I'm grateful every day that I didn't." Lucas's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I used to worry, in the early days, that you'd wake up one morning and realize you'd made a terrible mistake, that this life wasn't enough for you." "This life is everything to me," she said simply, resting her head against his shoulder. You and the children, this land. The community we've built here, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds that had become the soundtrack of their life together: the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the whisper of wind through the tall grass. "I love you, Lorelai Daniels," Lucas said finally, his voice husky with emotion. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." As stars scattered across the vast Nebraska sky, Lorelai thought of that long-ago day when she had stood beneath an oak tree, knife in hand, seeking to leave her mark on the world. She had found so much more than that. She had found her place, her purpose, her heart. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Lily grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, eventually heading east to attend college, a decision that both terrified and filled her parents with pride. James remained at the ranch, showing an intuitive understanding of the land and the business that impressed even the most experienced ranchers in the area. On a warm spring morning in 1895, as Lucas and Lorelai sat at their kitchen table discussing plans for the upcoming cattle drive, a messenger arrived with a telegram that would once again change the course of their lives. "It's from Charles Wyndham's attorney," Lorelai said, her voice tight as she read the brief message. "Charles died last month. Apparently he never married." She looked up at Lucas, her expression conflicted. "The attorney says there's something in his will concerning me, and I need to come to Chicago as soon as possible." Lucas frowned, taking the telegram from her hand. "After all these years, what could he possibly want from you now?" "I don't know," Lorelai admitted, "but I think I need to find out." So it was that 2 weeks later, Lorelai found herself back in Chicago for the first time in nearly 20 years. Lucas steadfastly at her side as they navigated the bustling streets that seemed both familiar and utterly foreign to her now. The city had grown enormously in her absence. The buildings taller, the pace faster, the noise and activity almost overwhelming after the relative quiet of ranch life. The law offices of Barrett, Haynes, and Cooper were housed in an imposing stone building in the heart of the business district. As they were shown into Mr. Barrett's office, Lorelai felt a strange sense of unreality, as if she were watching someone else go through these motions. "Mrs. Daniels," Mr. Barrett greeted her, rising from behind an enormous mahogany desk. "Thank you for coming all this way. I understand it must have been a considerable inconvenience." "We're here now," Lucas said, his hand protectively at the small of Lorelai's back. "What exactly did Mr. Wyndham want with my wife?" Mr. Barrett cleared his throat, gesturing for them to be seated. "As you may know, Mr. Wyndham was quite successful in his business ventures. When he passed, he left an estate valued at over $2 million. Lorelai blinked in surprise. She had known Charles came from money, but she had no idea his wealth had grown to such proportions. "The bulk of that estate," Mr. Barrett continued, "has been left to various charitable organizations. However, there is one specific bequest that concerns you, Mrs. Daniels." He slid a folder across the desk toward her. "Mr. Wyndham has left you the bookshop that once belonged to your parents, along with the building it occupies, and a sum of $50,000 for its maintenance and operation." Lorelai stared at the folder, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. "But the bookshop was sold after my parents died. Charles himself handled the sale." Mr. Barrett nodded. "Yes, and he was the buyer through a holding company. The shop has continued to operate all these years under a manager, It seems Mr. Wyndham always intended for it to return to you eventually." Tears pricked at Lorelai's eyes as memories flooded back of her father shelving books while humming softly under his breath, of her mother helping customers find exactly the right volume, of her own childhood spent curled in a window seat with stories that transported her to other worlds. "Why?" she whispered, more to herself than to the lawyer. "After everything, why would he do this?" Mr. Barrett hesitated, then reached into his desk drawer and withdrew an envelope. "He left this letter for you. Perhaps it will explain his motivations better than I can." With trembling fingers, Lorelai accepted the envelope, her name written across the front in Charles's distinctive handwriting. She glanced at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly, his eyes steady and supportive. "Would you like me to step out?" Mr. Barrett offered discreetly. "No," Lorelai said quickly. "That won't be necessary." She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside, Charles's words reaching out to her across the divide of death. "My dear Lorelai, if you are reading this, then I have left this world, hopefully having atoned in some small way for the wrongs I did to you. I was not a good man when we knew each other. Ambition and pride led me to treat you as a possession rather than the remarkable woman you are. When I came to Nebraska all those years ago, I told myself it was to reclaim what was rightfully mine. In truth, I think I needed to see for myself that you were happy, that you had found the life you deserved, even if it wasn't the one I had envisioned for you. I saw it in your eyes that day, the contentment I had never been able to give you. And in your cowboy's eyes, I saw a love I was incapable of offering, one without conditions or demands. The bookshop was your parents' legacy to you, one that I selfishly took away in my anger and hurt. It is long past time it was returned to its rightful owner. Do with it what you will sell it, keep it, burn it to the ground if it pleases you. It is yours without strings or expectations. I hope you have had a good life, Lorelai. I hope your Lucas has been everything I could not be. And I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive a foolish man who did not recognize the true value of what he had until it was gone." Charles Lorelai looked up from the letter to find Lucas watching her, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "Yes, it's just not what I expected." After a brief discussion with Mr. Barrett about the legalities of the inheritance, Lorelai and Lucas left the law office and walked in silence for several blocks, both lost in thought. "What do you want to do?" Lucas finally asked as they stopped at a small park. "About the bookshop." Lorelai sat on a bench, trying to sort through the emotions churning inside her. "I don't know," she admitted. "It feels like a part of my past that I closed the door on long ago." Lucas sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "It could be a gift, you know, a chance to reconnect with something that was important to you. Our life is in Galesburg," she reminded him. "The ranch, the children, well, James at least, that's our future." "The future can have more than one path," Lucas suggested, his eyes thoughtful. "James is practically running the ranch on his own already, and with Thomas and his boys helping, I could spare a few months here and there if you wanted to spend some time in Chicago." Lorelai looked at him in surprise. "You do that? Leave the ranch periodically to come here with me?" Lucas smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Lorelai, I'd follow you to the ends of the earth if that's where you needed to go. Besides," he added with a grin, "I've always wanted to see more of the world than Nebraska. This might be my chance." The next day they visited the bookshop. Stepping through the door was like stepping back in time, the familiar smell of paper and leather, the warm glow of lamps, the quiet murmur of customers browsing among the shelves. Lorelai moved through the space in a daze, trailing her fingers along spines of books, remembering. The current manager, A pleasant middle-aged woman named Mrs. Foster greeted them warmly. "Mr. Wyndham spoke of you often," she told Lorelai. "He said someday the shop would return to its rightful owner. Did he visit frequently?" Lorelai asked, curious about this side of Charles she had never known. Mrs. Foster nodded. "At least once a month. He would sit in that chair by the window and read for hours." She hesitated, then added, "He kept your parents' collection intact, you know, their personal books. They're in the back room, carefully preserved." Later, after exploring every corner of the shop and spending a tearful hour among her parents' beloved books, Lorelai and Lucas sat in a nearby cafe, discussing possibilities. "We could hire someone to run it most of the year," Lucas suggested. "Come for a month or two each spring and fall when the ranch needs less attention. And Lily could stay here when she's not at school," Lorelai added, warming to the idea. "It would give her a place of her own in the city." "So we're doing this?" Lucas asked, his eyes searching hers. "Keeping the bookshop," Lorelai reached across the table, taking his hands in hers. "If you're willing, yes. It feels right, somehow honoring my parents' memory while creating something new." Lucas smiled, lifting her hands to his lips. "Then that's what we'll do." Over the next several years, the bookshop became a central part of their lives, a second home that bridged the gap between Lorelai's past and present. They spent 2 months each year in Chicago, leaving James, now in his 20s and fully capable, in charge of the ranch with Thomas's support. During their city stays, Lucas discovered a passion for theater and museums that surprised even him, while Lorelai rediscovered the joy of sharing her love of books with others. Together, they expanded the shop's offerings, added a small cafe in one corner, and established a reading program for neighborhood children. Lily, who had graduated from college with a degree in English literature, eventually took over the day-to-day management of the shop, dividing her time between Chicago and visits home to Nebraska. Under her guidance, the business thrived, becoming a cultural hub that would have made her grandparents proud. And through it all, Lucas and Lorelai's love deepened and evolved, enriched by this new dimension of their shared life. They had found a balance that honored both their roots on the Nebraska prairie and the urban world that offered its own kind of beauty and fulfillment. On the 20th anniversary of their marriage, they once again returned to the oak tree that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The tree was older now, its trunk thicker, its branches more gnarled, but the L+L they had carved a decade earlier remained visible, a testament to their enduring connection. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucas pulled Lorelai close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been on that first day. 20 years, he murmured, kissing her temple. "Did you ever imagine we'd come so far?" Lorelai smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I didn't dare hope for it, but somehow I always knew." "Knew what?" "That you were my destiny," she replied simply. "From the moment you found me carving my name on your tree and told me to carve it on your heart instead, I think a part of me knew we were meant to find each other." Lucas smiled, the same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "Best vandalism that ever happened on my property," he repeated his old joke, making her laugh. As they walked back to the ranch house where family and friends waited to celebrate their anniversary, Lorelai's heart swelled with gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, for every triumph and struggle, every joy and sorrow that had shaped their life together. She had come to Galesburg seeking peace and a place to belong. She had found so much more: a love that defied expectations, a family that brought her joy beyond measure, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all begun with a knife, a tree, and a cowboy with the courage to offer his heart instead. The years continued their relentless march forward, bringing changes both expected and surprising. James married Sophie, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and together they took over the daily operations of the Daniels Ranch, expanding it further with innovative breeding techniques and modern management practices that impressed even the most traditional cattlemen in the area. Lily never married, choosing instead a life dedicated to books and learning. Under her guidance, the Chicago bookshop grew into a chain of 3 stores across the city, each one a sanctuary for readers and a tribute to the grandparents she had never known. Though she occasionally expressed loneliness, she confided to her mother that she had never met a man who stirred her heart the way Lucas had always moved Lorelai's. "Perhaps I'm too romantic," she mused during one of their mother-daughter conversations. "I want what you and Father have, and I refuse to settle for less." "There's nothing wrong with waiting for the right person," Lorelai assured her. "And there's nothing wrong with finding fulfillment in other aspects of life either." As they entered their 60s, Lucas and Lorelai settled into a comfortable routine, dividing their time between the ranch where they maintained a small cottage near the main house now occupied by James, Sophie, and their 3 children, and the apartment above the original bookshop in Chicago. They traveled more than they ever had before, visiting places they had only read about in books. New York, San Francisco, even a memorable trip to Europe for their 30th anniversary. Through it all, their love remained the cornerstone of their existence, evolving from the passionate romance of youth to the deep, abiding connection of a couple who had weathered life's storms together and emerged stronger for the experience. In the spring of 1915, as they prepared for their annual trip to Chicago, Lucas began experiencing troubling symptoms: shortness of breath, persistent fatigue, occasional chest pains that he tried to dismiss as indigestion, but that Lorelai recognized as something more serious. "You need to see Dr. Wilson," she insisted after finding him leaning against the barn door, his face pale and drawn. "It's nothing," Lucas protested, but the lack of conviction in his voice betrayed him. "Just getting old, that's all, Doctor." Wilson's diagnosis was grim. Lucas's heart was failing, weakened by years of hard physical labor and, perhaps, genetics. There were treatments that might help manage the symptoms, but no cure. "How long?" Lucas asked bluntly after the doctor had explained his condition. Dr. Wilson hesitated. "It's difficult to say with certainty. 6 months, perhaps a year if you're very careful. I'm sorry, Lucas." That night, as they lay in bed holding each other close, Lorelai finally gave in to the tears she had been fighting all day. "It's not fair," she whispered against Lucas's chest. "We were supposed to have more time." Lucas stroked her hair, his touch as gentle as always. "We've had more than most, my love. 37 years of more happiness than any man deserves." "It's not enough," she insisted, lifting her head to look at him through tear-blurred eyes. "It will never be enough." He wiped her tears with his thumb, his smile sad but serene. "Then we'll just have to make the most of whatever time we have left." And they did. With a new sense of urgency, they abandoned all thoughts of Chicago and instead focused on spending time with family and friends in Galesburg. Lucas insisted on continuing his daily walks, though they became shorter as his strength diminished. Each evening, they sat on the porch of their cottage, watching the sunset and reminiscing about the life they had built together. James and Sophie urged them to move back into the main house where they could provide better care, but Lucas resisted. "I want to live what's left of my life, not just endure it," he told his son firmly. "Your mother and I are managing fine in our own place." As summer gave way to fall, Lucas's condition deteriorated more rapidly than Dr. Wilson had predicted. By October, He was spending most of his days in bed, his once strong frame diminished, his voice weaker but his eyes still bright with the intelligence and humor that had always characterized him. One crisp autumn morning, much like the day they had first met, Lucas asked Lorelai to help him outside. "I want to see the tree," he explained as she wrapped him in a warm blanket. "Our tree." Though it was only a quarter-mile from the cottage to the ancient oak, the journey seemed endless, with Lucas leaning heavily on Lorelai and stopping frequently to catch his breath. When they finally reached it, he sank to the ground with his back against the trunk, pulling Lorelai down beside him. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" he asked, his voice faint but his smile genuine. "You were so determined to leave your mark on my tree. And you were so determined to flirt with the strange girl vandalizing your property," she replied, attempting to match his light tone despite the ache in her heart. Lucas laughed softly, the sound ending in a wheezing cough. When he recovered, he reached for her hand, his fingers cold against her skin. "Lorelai, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," she whispered, knowing instinctively what was coming. "Don't stop living when I'm gone," he said, his gaze intense. "Don't shut yourself away in grief. The bookshop, the children, the grandchildren, they'll all need you, and you'll need them." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. "I promise." Lucas lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her wedding ring. "I meant what I said that first day, you know, about carving your name on my heart. It's still there, as clear and permanent as the day we met. It always will be." 3 days later, Lucas slipped away peacefully in his sleep, Lorelai curled beside him as she had been for nearly 4 decades. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire population of Galesburg and the surrounding counties, a testament to the respect Lucas had earned throughout his life and the impact he had made on his community. The days that followed passed in a blur of grief for Lorelai. Despite the loving support of her children and grandchildren, despite the practical tasks that demanded her attention, she felt adrift without her anchor, her partner, her heart. A month after Lucas's death, on a cold November morning, Lorelai found herself once again at the old oak tree. She hadn't planned to come here, had, in fact, been avoiding it, but her feet seemed to carry her of their own accord. The tree stood solid and unchanging against the gray sky, its branches now bare of leaves but still reaching proudly upward. Lorelai ran her fingers over the carved initials, weathered by time but still distinct. "I miss you," she whispered, pressing her forehead against the rough bark. "Every moment of every day." The wind rustled through the branches above her, and for just a moment, she could almost hear Lucas's voice in the sound, gentle, reassuring, telling her that everything would be all right. Lorelai closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath of the cold air that carried the scent of earth and approaching snow and the faintest hint of something that reminded her of Lucas' leather and sunshine and home. "I promised I wouldn't stop living," she said aloud. "And I won't. But oh, how I wish you were still here to live it with me." As if in answer, a single dried leaf drifted down from above, landing at her feet. Lorelai picked it up, turning it over in her hands, a simple oak leaf, ordinary yet perfect in its design. She tucked it carefully into her pocket and turned toward home, her step a little steadier than it had been when she arrived. Lucas was gone, but what they had built together remained: the ranch, the bookshops, the family that was their greatest achievement and most enduring legacy. And in her heart, where he had carved his name so many years ago, his presence would always remain, guiding her, comforting her, loving her until they met again. The years that followed were both challenging and rewarding for Lorelai. True to her promise, she did not stop living, though there were days when grief threatened to overwhelm her. On those days, she would visit the oak tree, sitting beneath its spreading branches and finding solace in the memories that surrounded her there. Gradually, she established a new rhythm to her life. Summers were spent in Galesburg, helping with the grandchildren and enjoying the peace of the prairie landscape that had become so much a part of her. Winters found her in Chicago, working alongside Lily in the bookshops and embracing the cultural offerings of the city that had once been her home. In 1919, Lorelai published her first book, a collection of stories about life on the frontier, based on her own experiences and those Lucas had shared with her over the years. To her surprise, the book found a receptive audience, particularly among Eastern readers fascinated by the rapidly vanishing Wild West. Encouraged by this success, she began work on a novel, drawing inspiration from her own love story. It was therapeutic in a way, allowing her to relive the joy of falling in love with Lucas while transforming their experiences into something new and universal. The Carving was published in 1921 to critical acclaim and commercial success. At 63, Lorelai found herself embarking on an unexpected new career as an author, traveling to book signings and speaking engagements across the country. It was a far cry from the quiet ranch life she had lived for so many years, but there was a certain satisfaction in sharing stories that kept Lucas's memory alive. Her greatest joy, however, remained her family. James and Sophie's children, Lucas Jr., known as Luke to avoid confusion, Mary and Thomas, grew into fine young adults who carried on the Daniels legacy in their own unique ways. Luke took to ranching as naturally as his grandfather and father before him. Mary showed a talent for writing that delighted Lorelai, often accompanying her grandmother on book tours. Thomas, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing an interest in the emerging field of aviation, eventually becoming one of the first commercial pilots in the region. Lily, too, continued to flourish. Though she never married, she adopted a daughter, a bright, bookish girl named Alina who had been orphaned in the influenza epidemic of 1918. Together, they expanded the bookshop business further, opening locations in Denver and St. Louis, as well as maintaining the Chicago stores. As she entered her 70s, Lorelai began spending more time at the ranch, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings and the daily interaction with her family. The cottage she had shared with Lucas became her permanent home once again, though she made modifications to accommodate her aging body, a bedroom on the ground floor, handrails in strategic locations, a covered walkway connecting her cottage to the main house. It was in this cottage, surrounded by mementos of the life she and Lucas had built together, that Lorelai began work on what would become her final book, a memoir that traced the journey from their first meeting beneath the oak tree to the legacy they had created together. "It's not just our story," she explained to Mary, who often helped her organize her notes and transcribe her handwritten pages. "It's a story about America itself, about how we grew and changed, about the dreams that drove us and the love that sustained us through difficult times." Mary, who had inherited her grandmother's gift with words, nodded in understanding. "It's about carving something permanent in a world that's always changing." Lorelai smiled, touched by her granddaughter's insight. "Exactly. Just as Lucas and I carved our initials in that tree, we carved our lives into this land, into the people we loved, into each other's hearts." The memoir, titled "Carve It on My Heart," was published in 1935, as Lorelai approached her 77th birthday. It received widespread praise for its honesty, its historical detail, and its moving portrayal of a love that had spanned nearly 4 decades. In the spring of 1938, 60 years after she had first come to Galesburg seeking a fresh start, Lorelai fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of doctors and the loving care of her family, her condition steadily worsened. On a warm May morning, as sunlight streamed through the cottage windows, she asked James to help her outside one last time. "The tree," she whispered, her voice weak but determined. "I want to see our tree." James, his hair now silver like his father's had been, his face lined with the same creases that had marked Lucas's features, nodded in understanding. With the help of Sophie and Luke, they settled Lorelai in a wheelchair and carefully made their way to the ancient oak that had stood witness to the beginning of the Daniels family story. The tree was showing its age now, its trunk gnarled and twisted, but still standing strong against the Nebraska sky. The initials Lucas and Lorelai had carved decades earlier were still visible, though weather and time had softened their edges. "Leave me for a little while," Lorelai requested once they had positioned her wheelchair in the shade of the spreading branches. "I need some time alone." Though clearly reluctant, her family respected her wishes, retreating to a respectful distance where they could still keep watch but allow her the privacy she sought. Alone beneath the tree where her life in Nebraska had truly begun, Lorelai closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her Lucas's face the first time she saw him. The sound of his laughter, the strength of his arms around her, the wisdom and kindness that had made him the heart of their family. "I've kept my promise," she murmured, her fingers tracing the carved initials as they had so many times before. "I lived, Lucas. I lived as fully as I could without you, but I'm tired now and I miss you so." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves above her, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed grass. Lorelai smiled, a sense of peace settling over her that she hadn't felt since Lucas's death. "I'm coming home," she whispered. When James returned a short while later, he found his mother sitting peacefully beneath the oak tree, her eyes closed and a serene smile on her face. Her hand rested on the carved initials, as if maintaining that connection until the very end. Lorelai Keller Daniels was laid to rest beside Lucas in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. At her funeral, Mary read passages from Carve on My Heart, including the final paragraph that had so perfectly captured the essence of her grandparents' enduring love. "In the end, it is not the marks we leave on trees or buildings or even books that truly matter. It is the imprint we make on each other's hearts, the love we give, the memories we create, the legacy we leave in the lives we have touched." Lucas carved his name on my heart that day beneath the oak tree, and I carved mine on his. Those invisible carvings have outlasted everything else, stronger than wood, more permanent than stone, more precious than gold. And when we meet again, as I believe with all my soul we will, those carvings will still be there, as fresh and deep as the day they were made. In the decades that followed, the Daniels Ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of successive generations. The oak tree became a place of pilgrimage for family members, a tangible connection to the couple whose love had started it all. And though time eventually reclaimed the tree itself, a lightning strike in 1957, splitting its ancient trunk and ending its long life, the story of Lucas and Lorelai lived on, passed down from parents to children, from grandparents to grandchildren. A testament to the enduring power of love carved not on wood, but on the human heart.